Welcome to Theory of Conspiracy. Don't adjust your headset, you are listening to three northern lads from the UK talking about their own beliefs whilst challenging each other's.
Hi, I'm Nick and I'm the truther.
Hi, I'm Andy the Skeptic.
Hello, I'm Carlos. I believe.
TheoCons, welcome to episode 12, 9/11 Twin Towers. Carlos is going to chair this one. Nick's back with us. He's been sorely missed.
Thanks.
No, welcome back, Nick. We've missed you.
Great to be back.
Andy just mentioned I'll be chairing this one. Even I can't get a word in when it comes to 9/11. And those that have been listening to our podcast, I don't shut up. I can talk until the cows come home. And this one is I'm going to leave up to Nick and Andy to discuss, see if they can put their own twist on it, and obviously their own things they've discovered over the last, say, 18, 19 years. Because I think you two have been probably conversing about this since probably the conspiracy theories actually physically started on this subject.
No, we don't talk about it anymore. Andy's got his ideas and I've got my ideas, and we'll leave it at that.
I've actually been sat there in the room, and used to was just like a machine gun effect. It was like a Gatling gun versus a Gatling gun. It was like, it was, and even I was just going, I was just trying to get words in, and I couldn't get words in. So I'm happy to chair. So Nick, I'll let you go first, because obviously I know this is a subject you're so passionate about, and you've even since conspiracy theory started on this.
Don't ham it up too much, Carlos. I'm not that passionate about it.
No, but you do. You have a lot of opinions on it. You have a lot of opinions on it.
No, I don't have that many opinions. I just think it was an inside job. It's quite simply too many things just don't add up on that day.
Can we narrow it down? When we say 9/11 Twin Towers, the biggest point of contention I have is that the towers were some sort of rigged demolition, and they didn't. And I believe that they fell completely naturally. And where you completely differ on that,
That's because I apply the law of physics to what I see.
Okay.
And they were obviously suspended on that day for whatever reason.
Okay.
Well done.
So go on. So
Whoever
so going back to Carlos's throw over, then, do you want to kick off, or do you want me to kick off?
You can kick off if you like. Sound like you got something to say?
Go on, Andy. So you go ahead, put a point across.
Go on. Okay, I'll kick off. So just talking about the towers collapsing, I'm not disputing that it wasn't a false flag attack, and there wasn't a lot going on, and there wasn't a conspiracy to actually crash planes into the towers. That's all fine, right? I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is purely how the towers fell from the plane damage and the fuel, and then how they fell. I believe they fell completely naturally, and the overall is that to rig those towers with some sort of demolition explosive, and then to time it to come down to make it look like it's a reverse demolition, as people describe it, would have involved far too many people and overcomplicate it. So it was nothing more complicated than the real laws of physics in the real world, not on paper, not Einstein's calculations, which, when you've got to factor in things like friction and all these other things, a million other things going on. Yes, I'm not just talking about every action has an equal and opposite reaction. On paper, yes, it does. But even when I did physics at college, they go, yeah, well, you can do this calculation, but then you've got to factor in the physics of that ball that's just been knocked rolling across the surface of that desk. No matter how smooth the ball and how smooth the desk, and the fact that there's no wind or it's in a vacuum, there will still be friction. So your calculation of energy will slightly dissipate. So that's my starting.
There'll be friction in a vacuum.
There'll still be friction between the ball rolling across the table, yeah.
Yeah, I get what you mean on the toe surfaces.
Yeah. So you can't. So basically, things like that. When you talk about materials like that, I was reading just the other day. Someone said actually that doesn't really apply to steel, but it also doesn't apply to any other known object in the universe because of this reason. Because there are other factors. So I'm talking real world physics. You have to take those things into account. I know I will probably get into the speed of the towers falling and free fall and all that because that's where I think the physics argument comes into it.
Not for me. The physics happens way before that.
Go on, where does physics happen?
For it to have happened the way that it happened on both those towers, the structure would have to be weakened sufficiently. The entire structure had to weaken sufficiently for them both to collapse like that, it's just impossible. So, assuming, I'd like to hear what your arguments are that brought down the towers, but this is what I'm looking at here. Assuming the plane went in there and done the damage like they said it did,
Yeah.
and the fire, and I know that you're a big fan of the fire, has melted the rest of the building, so it's all just collapsed in on itself quite conveniently, but it just never happened like that. The witnesses' statements say it didn't happen like that, and also the laws of physics that I know, what would have happened was that building would have went, first of all, at the weakest point, right? So for it all to go simultaneously means it's all there, teetering on the edge, the brink of destruction, and then all just to go. No, I'm not having that. Most of that building was solid. Had the damage been done by the plane, what would have happened is that floor or two above would have crashed down onto this floor and the top would have tippled off. It's happened before. You know, they've seen when buildings fail like this, steel and concrete buildings fail like that, they go in a certain way. There's plenty of other instances where you can see buildings collapse around the world and the laws of physics have held fast.
You've never been able to show me one of them buildings.
I showed you one after the. It just happens. There was an earthquake in one of the things, and the top of it breaks off and falls over. That's what happened. The weakest point goes first.
An earthquake is completely different to a fire in the center of it that's weakened all the steel structure. Nothing's weakened that steel structure in that earthquake, so it's a completely different scenario.
Well, it would be weak. Just the friction and movement of the building.
Nothing like.
Movement will be weakened.
Should we talk about fire?
So, do you accept then that the whole building has to be teetering on the edge of collapse for it to all collapse at the same time?
No, just parts of it. So, if you think about all the floors above the plane, pretty much were intact.
Mm-hmm.
So, even if you take Tower 1, which was hit first, that had about 12, 15 floors above it, something like that. So, okay, some of that might have fallen in because of the fire and stuff, but pretty much everything else was still there. So you've got this big solid block of weight. When you talk about the weak point going first, that weak point would have been the floor below the plane impact.
The weak point would have been the floor of the impact.
Well, yeah, the floor of the impact. That the one with the most damage, yeah.
But what you got to remember is that building was held up from the outside. It didn't have much in the way of support on the inside, like modern.
You can say that.
It was all
you can say that.
So the plane cut through most of the support on the floors above it.
Yeah, but you can say that. But later on, when you start looking at other arguments, the truthers will then throw in, oh well, what about the core of the building? Why blah blah blah? And it's like so in one argument you're saying that the core's got no strength, and in the other argument you're saying the core's got all the strength. You can't have like both ways. But just to finish my thing, so say you've got a block of 10 floors that are all solid, and you've got this floor somewhere in the plane crash area that's weakened, and there's been a fire. So on Tower 1, the fire burned for 150 minutes, I think.
140 minutes to be exact.
140 minutes. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
On Tower 2, it burned for about 56 minutes. But let's just look at Tower 1 because, to be honest, I'm not bothered about the towers, but because it's both the same, it's just different masses because of different number of floors above the impact zone. So that block of 10 floors falls into whatever floor below, right? That floor can't sustain that impact because it's been weakened, and the weight of that floor then gets added to the floor above. So then you've got 11 floors smashing into the floor below. That smashes and buckles. You've then got 12 floors.
The old pancake effect.
Well, it is a pancake effect, but I didn't know till I looked into it that as it's pancaking,
it doesn't exist.
It does exist. Who says it doesn't exist?
It's never been proven. So the pancake theory come up because the NTSB was not asked to investigate the cause. They were asked to come up with a reason that the building would have collapsed this way. That's the reason they come up with. They didn't base it on actually what happened. They were just asked a question, and this is the response: the pancake effect.
Right.
So they never really done a thorough investigation of what brought the building down. The whole thing, why, if it was, why wouldn't have an investigation? Why wouldn't they look at it? Why the whole thing has just been whitewashed from start to finish? And that is all the evidence I need to know that it's kooky as fuck. And I think that the towers were bought down because they couldn't afford to bring them down. They were laden with asbestos. There was $1 billion bill to demolish the towers. It was just never going to happen. It's prime real estate. Nobody was it was practically empty. If you look at some of the pictures that you see on the internet, you can see right through the thing, and there's not a chair or desk in it. That's just the towers. And then you got Building 7, and then you got the fact that they won't testify to a grand jury. Just the list of things that go, and the whole. Oh man,
No, let me jump in here. So Nick, you just said about 2 or 3 things here. So just because obviously, just rewind a little bit. It's an interesting point you've just said there regarding regarding the asbestos and the prime estate. So do you think this could have been some kind of the biggest insurance scam in the history of insurance scams? Do you think?
mate, it's the biggest con in modern day history. Yeah, without a shadow of doubt, everything about it. So the guy buying the towers 2 months before they were collapsing, indemnifying them, double indemnifying them, not even. Oh, the list goes on. If you look at each individual event, and then you add it all together, I think all this can happen, and then all it happen in one day. Why, by the laws of chance? No, it's not right.
So what
It's
you're
just
saying
kooky.
is too many coincidences happen in one day for it to gone one, and for one person to benefit so much financially. So obviously, Andy, would you like to answer that, Andy?
I've got no comment on any of that because I think Nick has just watched too many videos on YouTube, and people are
Too many videos.
just throwing stuff.
Like what?
Just people spouting stuff that you've just spouted. All these coincidences. To me, they're all unproven coincidences. It's something I've not wasted my time looking into because at the end of the day, when it comes to the actual physics of bringing down the building, none of the arguments about how the building was brought down stand up, other than the fact that what actually happened. So just going right back to the start of this pancaking malarkey doesn't exist and they didn't do any sort of study. I've watched a few things, but I found a video the other night that's this guy, and to be honest, I thought he was another truther because he started saying, "Oh yeah, I stood there and I witnessed it on the day, and I thought that was very strange." And I'm like, "Oh my god, this sounds just like a truther." He says, "So I've dedicated the last 10 years of my life looking at this and researching this, that, and the other. And basically, I've come up with my own computer model. I've put it all into the computer model, and I'm like, oh my god, he's gonna." I was just waiting for him to go, and I can prove on my computer model that the only thing that could have brought it down was demolition. And he completely surprised me. I don't know why I watched the video for this long, and it was only a couple of minutes long. But because I dismissed him straight away, but actually, to my surprise, he went, "No, I did it based on what they said happened." And his computer came out.
It's also
His
shrill.
computer model even came out with the exact same times of the buildings falling.
Well, that's handy. Definitely a shrill then, isn't he?
Well, obviously, let me add to this because obviously the one the one Nick suggested regarding insurance, because the guy who, what's the name of the guy? Larry Bernstein. That's it. Did he not just about a month before the event, he just decided to take out terrorism insurance on his building as well, like a month beforehand?
It's got nothing to do with how the building fell.
No, but just going back what Nick suggested regarding insurance.
It's still got nothing to do with how the buildings fell. By crashing 2 planes into those buildings and the damage they did, whether them buildings fell down or whether they were able to put the fire out, which obviously they didn't. Let's just imagine for 1 second they crash those planes, does all that damage, they manage to put the fire out, and the buildings stay standing. Right? There's no way them buildings aren't coming down. The insurance would have had to pay for them to come down and be demolished safely because they would be in danger.
Correct.
Right? So either way, if those buildings had managed to keep standing, they would have had to come down anyway. Job done. That's why you didn't then need to go and blow it up. The damage done by the planes was enough. If this is your argument, that is enough. It involves just the people that are flying the planes to cause the incident. You don't have to have a team of demolition people. You don't have to send people into the building to prep all these columns. Let's go back to prepping these columns, right?
That's a really good point, Andy. No, it's a really good point you just said, Dan. A really good point.
I built a spreadsheet, and I'll let you two guys have a play with it. Nick, it was years ago you had a go, and literally this week I gave it to Carlos. The premise,
literally a couple of days ago,
yeah. The premise of the spreadsheet is you've got two towers in front of you, and you're in charge of. You know that a plane's going to hit them, and you're in charge of rigging them weeks before with explosive on each floor. and it asks you, where do you want to put your explosive? Right. So Carlos does that, and then what happens is you then asked another. So it gets even more complicated because it's not just about rigging it with explosives, and this is why it gets complicated. It then asks you, okay, this is the building's completely rigged. This is the day a plane strikes Tower 1, and then a plane strikes Tower 2, and then it asks you every 15 minutes. You're sat there as the demolition expert in a van, blacked out van somewhere. You can see the towers on fire, and it's your decision at that point to press this button and blow them up and bring them down. So Tower 1 gets hit first. 15 minutes later, Tower 2, and you then sit there, and every 15 minutes, it's like, how long? Looking at your watch, how long do you think I should wait before I hit the button and blow this up? Right. So Tower 1 get hit first, so that one's been burning for an hour. Tower 2 has only been burning for 45 minutes. Which one should I hit first? And what Carlos did was he blew Tower 1 first, and then he blew Tower 2. And what actually happened on the day, as we know, is, and as we've already mentioned, Tower 2 got hit second, but came down first because it only burned for less than 60 minutes, whereas the other one took twice as long to burn and come down. Now, all he was doing was he was playing the mind of this demolitions expert, and he was going, well, Tower 1 got hit first. It's been burning 15 minutes longer. I'll bring that one down first, and then I'll bring the other one down 15 minutes later. So that's just one thing, and you can stop me and talk me about that as well. But the second thing is, you have no way of knowing at what point, what floor
The plane's
those
going
planes
to
are going to hit.
basically.
So if you've laid thermite,
They knew exactly where the planes were going to fit. They were laser guided.
Okay, right. So they were laser guided. Okay.
They didn't have an Arab in there trying to fly it at 500 miles an hour, trying to hit a space that's like 20
so this
meters wide.
conspiracy theory is just getting even more and more complicated just to fit around these difficult questions that you have to answer.
No, I don't think so.
Let's pretend they were laser guided, and this was going to hit floor 92, and the other one was going to hit floor 74, right? Okay. You need it to start collapsing just under where that plane's hit. I said this to Carlos. There is absolutely no explosive you can find that you cannot guarantee will not accidentally go off when a fucking plane hits it, and when a fire fucking burns for an hour.
Do you know that's a fact, or are you just making that up?
No.
Because I think there's plenty of stuff out there that won't go unless it's fired.
No.
Yeah, because it's true. Because it's all we find World War II bombs that have not gone off yet, have we?
That's true, but they could go off at any fucking second, Carlos. It's just that they.
That's true, but they've not gone off yet, so they clearly
weren't hit by a plane.
They were dropped on something.
They were dropped. They've landed in mossy ground. There's a moss near us where they find loads of them. They've landed in soft ground, so that impact's not set them off. Whenever they find one, the whole area is shut down because it could go off at any second. You get that bomb and crash a plane on it, and then tell me it's not going to go off. It's going to go off, innit? Can we talk about the explosives then?
Yeah, go on.
So what explosives were used?
I don't know. I'm not an explosives expert.
Okay.
I just think that the events there that happened just don't fit with my idea of how the laws of physics should be applied to that event. What about the B-52 bomber that crashed into the top of the...
It wasn't the same sort of impact, and
But it burned for 48 hours. What about the one in South America that burned for a couple of days and still stood there? The whole thing was burnt from top to bottom by the time it finished going on fire.
weren't identical accidents, man. They weren't. You can't compare an orange with a nectarine, can you? Or a tangerine with an orange, because they're different. The building's different. The plane's different.
Point about them is they are all consistent with the laws of physics. Those events are all consistent with the laws of physics. You could have said what was going to happen. You know, people could look at that and go, "This is what's going to happen." Nobody would have looked at that, put the building into it, the plane into that floor, and said that whole building's going to collapse into its own footprint. I don't think that, and I don't think you could recreate that.
We'll come back to the footprint, right? So let's stay on explosives, right? So have you seen a tower that's been rigged with explosives? Big barrels of explosives.
I have, yeah.
Big barrels.
Yeah.
Building 7, you mean?
No.
Building 7?
No.
No,
All
we're
right,
not talking about those.
Just like any normal building. Big barrels of explosives.
One that collapses and looks just like Building 7 then, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
If you say so. So
yeah, I've seen buildings collapse before.
Okay, Building 7's nothing to do with the Twin Towers. So big barrels of explosives, blah blah blah, right? So quite obvious, these big things, lots of fucking wires all over the place. So you must have heard of thermite because that's what all the truthers say. Oh, they got around that by painting thermite on the columns. Okay, thermite, you might be able to put it in some sort of liquid and paint it and it dries out. But you've still got to detonate it with some sort of explosive. So I'll tell you a few facts. These are facts about thermite, right? So the other reason I mentioned thermite is because you get this red dust conspiracy that was found everywhere, which apparently is proof of thermite because it's iron thermite, iron rust, it turns red dust, right? You've definitely heard of this, Nick, because you've sent me shit on it.
Iron oxide.
To detonate thermite, you need a flame of a temperature of 600 degrees C, or you need some sort of primary explosive to set it off. Normally it's a magnesium strip, yeah, right? Okay. Although magnesium strips can be unreliable because when you set them off as a fuse, bits can fall off early, and you can get early ignitions because it can fall off and drop onto the thing you're trying to blow up. It's basically, even with like a 600-degree blowtorch on it, it still requires quite a persistent effort to actually set it off and ignite it, and it can be unreliable and predictable. So to use that as a timed explosive to melt through columns, plus melting a column takes more time than a quick bang, very fast reacting explosive, which is actually used in demolitions, just wouldn't work as a demolition tool. It wouldn't burn through those columns quick enough for it to cause the reaction that you think it would cause to reproduce that visual effects that you saw. Yeah.
Happy to. I'm not going to argue with any of that. I have no idea what was used, but yeah, I've never ever said it was thermite.
Okay, so going to free fall then. Free fall of the height of the towers is 9.1 seconds. The best one I could see, because it's a visual thing, because I think your visual thing, you've seen it, and it does look strange. It does look like this big chunk is falling into the other chunk and nothing's resisting it. But the best way to show that those buildings are not falling at free fall speed is when you look at the dust clouds, you can see the dust bellowing outwards and bellowing downwards. And you can see the dust is falling and the debris is falling faster than the building's collapsing. Therefore, the building is not collapsing, nowhere near free fall speed.
I wouldn't say nowhere near. There's only 2 seconds difference between how it actually fell and what you're saying is free fall speed, in it. 9 seconds against 11 seconds or something, in it. So there's not a million miles apart. Plus, you've got 100,000 tons of concrete in between you and the eventual landing of the ground. Of course, you're going to have resistance.
It might have taken 11 seconds for the bulk of the top of that building to hit the bottom, right? And that is exactly what the seismic graph shows. Okay, which is more evidence that truthers use, but actually it can be used against them when you don't take shit out of context, which a lot of conspiracy theorists do. There's also evidence that actually 60 stories of World Trade Center 1, just more than half the building, actually was still standing for like about 25 seconds after the initial collapse. So although you're seeing
60 stories, wow.
Yeah, I've said this to you before, right? All you can see on that video is that top portion of that building. Once it goes into that cloud of dust, nobody can see nothing. You do not know what is happening from 90 stories down. You can't use your eyes as a guide to say, oh, that definitely hit the bottom after 9 seconds or after 11 seconds, whatever time you want to come up with, because you can't physically see what's happening, because you don't get X-ray vision and see through clouds of dust. All you're seeing is the top part, the build. And you did mention this earlier. The reason why the building is so weak, if you want to talk, because we'll talk about fire. So the melting point of steel is 1300 degrees C. I'm not doing it in Fahrenheit for those American listeners. Jet fuel burns at 825 degrees C. However, steel loses 50% of its strength at just under 600 degrees C. So the steel beam that could support 1 ton at 600 degrees C can only support half a ton. At 900 degrees, it can actually only support about 10% of its weight. So all of a sudden, you're talking about a tenth of a ton. The jet fuel actually all burned off after 10 minutes as well. It was the combustible material inside the buildings, which reached pockets of up to 1,000 degrees C. So that is why all this steel was so weak, and it was literally just like dropping a brick into some jelly, on them first however many floors that all that fire penetrated below. I was saying this before when you mentioned the pancaking. So the mass of the upper floors, every time it hits and pancakes another floor, its mass is increasing. But what that is hitting is just the mass of one floor below it, right? So that doesn't have enough resistance to introduce a topple effect, which is why you don't see it topple over, because there's not enough. There isn't actually enough resistance there. No matter how strong that core is, even when you start getting into the harder core, it's still very hard. But obviously, some of it survived. 40 floors of it's managed to stand up for 25 seconds of being pulverized. But
You made quite a few points there, obviously, Andy. So, is there a particular point you want?
any one of them, I was waiting for Nick to step in, but it doesn't sound like Nick wants the question.
Nick, is there anything you really want to pick out? Because there's probably about 8 points he made there. Is there anything you really want to pick out on there?
No, they're all just theories that are out there to explain an unexplainable event. Even those theories, I put as much weight on those theories as I do on my theory that it just shouldn't have happened like that.
The theory's backed up by physical evidence, though, Nick, whereas yours aren't.
There's an old adage that a falling object takes the path of least resistance, and I didn't see anything taking. That's not a real thing.
That argument is flawed. That argument is flawed because, like I've just said, there was not enough resistance to introduce a topple effect.
See, I just didn't buy that, because that would mean the whole building has to simultaneously be on the brink of collapse for it all to collapse in on itself, or at no point for any of those floors below to go, just hang on 1 second, for none of them to do that. And even though the weight below was 10 times the weight what was falling on top of it, it all just collapsed about the weight that was falling on top of it.
It's not though, is it? There's more fucking air in a building than there is anything else. That's the problem here then, isn't it? Because that is where your understanding of the physics or that physical action or that visualization is flawed.
In your opinion, maybe one of the listeners can put us right. It's the solid bits compressing that people have a problem with, not the air.
They're not compressing from the bottom upwards, stopping it falling. They're compressing from the top down. So that's exactly my point. The top of that building is getting heavier and heavier and heavier. The more floors it sucks up as it hits them.
The top of that building should have got fallen off the side as soon as it hit the first couple of floors.
There was nothing there.
That's what should have happened
to hit in the
in
first
the normal
few floors.
world.
It had all burnt away.
So it all, like you say, it was all on the brink of collapse, and it just happened to go right at that time. With what you're saying,
When it reached fatal, the catastrophic weight or whatever, it just gave way. Give me some evidence for explosives. What physical evidence is there for explosives?
I don't have any. I'm not an expert on that. I'm just telling you, I don't believe those events, and I don't believe how they described it happening can actually happen in the real world. And I don't believe that a fallen object like that will keep collapsing in on. It just doesn't happen. Just at some point, the mass below has got to be enough for it to start to lean over, and as soon as it does that, the mass of the energy, the weight of the thing will pull it over, and it will fall off the side. Nothing you're ever going to say is ever going to change. No amount of any bullshit on the internet about explaining thermite, the dust, or anything. None of that is ever going to convince me that those events just don't add up. And then Building 7 doesn't add up. The Twin Towers don't add up. The Pentagon doesn't add up.
Convince you? A real physicist telling you, actually, Nick, what you're visualizing is wrong.
If you can get somebody, that knows what they're talking about to convince me, if you've got a listener that knows physics, then I'd love to hear. I'd love to be convinced, because I'm just not buying that that's how it happened.
I'm not buying. I don't need to buy it. It's real proven physics.
I don't think it's proven. Don't think the pancake theory is proven. I think it's a theory.
Numerous different computer simulations by different people have all proven it.
And also, when you see the pictures of debris at the bottom, and you see that column that's got that like cut through it and the molten steel and stuff, how do you explain that? What are they saying about that? Are they saying that was the construction crew?
Could have been one of the columns. One of the columns severed by the plane. Could have been anything. Could have been damaged in the fall.
No, it was at the bottom. It was actually one of the ground. It was one of the ones sticking out the ground. It hadn't come and fallen from the ground and landed there. All of them had disappeared into dust.
Nah, it could have been. Could have been anything.
So wait, what melted that steel at that angle to make it like that? What part of the building, the heat, the fire, cut through it like that?
That could have been severed by the plane, right? Because you
Dude,
said
severed by the plane. It's
even you said
aluminium. Plane's made of nothing.
Even you said. So you're saying none of the columns in those floors were severed?
Oh, I dare say it done a fair bit of damage and crashed through a fair few of them or whatever, but it didn't cut it through at a perfect angle like that on both sides of the girder. Dude, you're really reaching with it.
Could have happened 1,000 different ways.
Just do me a favour, have a look back at that one little piece and tell me how the is it truthers or what?
That one little piece.
Yeah.
Right? Let's say that was cut by thermite.
Let's not say it was cut by thermite. Let's not say it was cut by thermite. Let's just find out how it ended up in that shape.
According to truthers, only thermite would make that sort of cut.
Right, wait a minute. Am I a truther because I believe that was fake? I'm a truther, am I not? Am I?
No, I'm saying only truthers, people that call them 9/11 truthers, use that as evidence of thermite.
Right, I'm not using it as evidence of thermite. I'm not using it as evidence. Forget thermite, because I've never ever said anything about thermite. That's all too convenient for everybody to jump on. I'm not an explosive expert in any way, shape, or form. I'm interested to know.
So if it was any other explosive, it's not going to leave a cut like that with a melt, is it?
Well,
so therefore that was done by fire damage and something else.
Right, wait. So
I can't tell you what it was done, but no one else can.
I know you can't, but you must have looked at it. There must have, the people on your side of the argument must have looked at it and said, oh yeah, that was the planes cut through that quite obviously.
No, there's no one on my side. I'm just guessing. I don't know what cut that. All I'm saying is it wasn't thermite and it wasn't explosive.
Wait. How can you say that so confidently if you know it wasn't thermite? How can you say that? If you don't know what did it, how can you say so confidently it wasn't thermite?
Because there was no thermite involved in bringing them buildings down, full stop.
Okay then, it wasn't thermite. What did it?
Let me jump in. Nick, you mentioned things about kinetic energy. Could it be in the impact of the plane or someone just slicing right? Because obviously kinetic energy. I've seen the picture. I'm just trying to reminisce what it looks like in my head.
Right.
It looks like a steel girder that's cut at a 45-degree angle. Yeah. No one's actually fucking measured it to see whether it is 45 or 44 or whatever. But let's say it's 45.
Well, let's say it's 40. Who cares what angle it is? It's at a funny angle and it's being cut.
And the edge, it looks like it's a clean cut from the angle it's taken at, but you can't see a 360 thing of it all the way around. So, it could just be the angle of the camera.
Your argument's rather convenient on this point, mate. You seem to be so confident on all the other points that you've got it soused up. This one, you're just going, let's just not look at that one. Let's just ignore it because it's just got to be a natural thing. It doesn't look natural to me.
I'll tell you what doesn't look natural.
Go on.
Giant's Causeway. Guess what? It's fucking natural. Oh no, nature doesn't produce straight edges.
Dude, you're really grasping now. Wait, you just think that's a natural phenomenon? That girder is just naturally evolved like that, through the course of this building collapse. It's left that column like that naturally. Fair dues. I can't argue with that. And I have nothing to argue with it other than that's absurd. Thank you. I close my case.
All I've gathered from this podcast is used to are even further apart.
Dude, we're not any further apart. I told you at the start, Andy has his set of theories and I don't believe any of them. So it's all good.
But the interesting thing is, no matter what, if Andy puts science or physics in front of you, and if Nick puts a good point towards Andy will brush it aside as well.
Yeah, because there's never any evidence, Carlos. There's never any evidence coming the other way. And if it is, it's flawed. It's flawed.
If it was the planes that did it, then there would have been a fuller investigation into how. We would have had an explanation on. They would have looked at how and not just.
Doesn't matter what investigation they would have done, right? Because for a fact, you've not read that NIST document, and right, but you've probably listened to people that say they've read that document, and again, they've taken bits out of context from that document to back their
What bit
theories
do you
up
think I've used out
and
of
ignored
context? I haven't said anything. I've not really referred to anything other than they didn't do a proper investigation.
It doesn't matter whether there was 10 investigations, 1, none. There was no explosives because I keep going back. There was never any need for explosives. Even if they put the fires out, they still would have had to take them buildings down. The insurance still would have paid out. There was no need to bring them buildings down.
That makes 100% sense because if you ever no, because what you're saying, and it was, and you've made me think differently. Where if your house, God forbid, if somebody's house is on fire, they don't rebuild the house; they flatten the house and start it again. So that what you're saying is, I've tried thinking, okay, even if there wasn't any bombs or thermite in the building and the planes crashed, they probably would have had to have brought the buildings down due to health and safety. So even what you put that forward. I'm not saying I'm still got my ideologies, my philosophy, what's going on, but you've made me think differently because once you say if someone's house is on fire, they absolutely flatten the house. They don't rebuild the house; they just flatten it and start it from scratch. That's what they do because obviously you won't get insurance on it otherwise.
Yeah.
So, Andy, is it anything you think? Do you know what? Even physics and science can't answer that. That's a bit fishy. Is there anything you think? Okay,
No, I've seen plausible.
the argument you put forward.
Plausible, reasonable explanations for every single thing that Nick's put at me.
I find it interesting. Andy, that you don't find anything fishy. I understand. It's like you put a good argument forward in science, mathematics, physics. You put it, and it's like I've jotted a few things down. You've made me think differently on a couple of items.
I'll just say scientific arguments not convinced me.
You don't find anything fishy. That's what concerns me. You don't find anything fishy.
Because the thing with science and maths or whatever, it's all repeatable, proven.
But don't you think that sometimes too many coincidences happen in one day?
No, coincidences. Carlos, how many coincidences happened to you the other week? If you can wipe out every single piece of literature and the memory of it all, and through natural exploration and rediscovery, we will write all the same mathematics and all the same science books because 1 + 1 = 2 at the end of the day. You know, the chemical elements are what they are. The way they react is the way they react. You know, oxygen and hydrogen make water. You're just going to repeat. All that is going to be. That is what science and maths is. It's proven. So if you can come up with a reason why something wasn't what a truther says it is, even though they're throwing 50,000 different things at you just to try and confuse you and bombard you with it, just because something looks a bit odd to those people that can't naturally explain it, you got to look beyond that. You got to look at real things.
No, I think just one in this one. There's just too much at stake, too much, and it allowed the United States and the United Kingdom to do what they did.
They would have done it anyway. If the towers remained standing, they would have done it anyway. Yeah, at TheoConPod, whatever. Give us your anger.
Stick around for some bloopers and sound bites taken out of context that didn't make the edit for this episode, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Cool. I don't think there'll be many outtakes in this one, man.
Carlos, go on mute, you fucker.
Yeah, so this is our last ever podcast, listeners.
On 9/11.
Oh, Carlos, he gets that in.
Wait, a stoner has a meeting at fucking 8:30 in the morning. It runs over by 30 minutes. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. Why? What was the? Give me the synopsis of what you've come to a conclusion of.
That I'm always right.
Well, in your head, Carlos.
20, 8, 5,
18,
5,
6, 15, 18,
5,